This is Leisha Holmes, and I'm your host on the Recruitment podcast. And I'm really excited to welcome a fellow podcaster, actually, to our wonderful global community today. This is Christian Hughes, and he is the CEO of MyPeople and podcast host on Building Great Teams. Welcome to you today, Christian. How are you?
Thank you. Amazing. Delighted to be here. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Now, I think we were connected via an actual real life event in 2022 at the Recruitment Expo in the NEC in Birmingham, which I have to say was my first ever Recruitment Expo, and just huge hats off to the organisers because I thought it was a fantastic event.
It was really good, wasn't it? It was sort of strange seeing people back in person. I think that was one of the first sort of events that I'd been to after COVID. I mean, it feels like one of those after moments where we keep saying after COVID, and I'm sure somewhere in the next few years we'll stop saying that, but it probably was the first moment of meeting humans again in real life for me.
We have to contextualize it. I mean, I'm certainly one of those people that I'm probably a little bit inappropriate in environments like that because I'm a hugger. So I'm just like, because I feel like I know somebody on social media, I'll just come up and go hi and give everybody a hug. But it was for that reason, yes, it had a really lovely vibe to it because I think people were just so happy to be around other people. But actually, from a content point of view, from the caliber of people that were actually there and exhibitors like yourself, I thought it was exceptional. And it totally, my expectation was genuinely blown out the water. And I've told everybody that they have to go to a Recruitment Expo. So it was really nice to get to know you guys. I think we stood and had a chat, myself and Shannon had a chat with your guys and yourself for quite a long time. So there will be plenty of people that will be wondering what's MyPeople. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background, I'm a psychologist. My starting point was in sport. So I have a mixed experience. In fact, if I'm honest, my first job was in recruitment. I wasn't particularly good at it. And I lasted about 12 months. And then I had a passion for people and the science of performance. So I was very lucky to get involved in sport. And so I've worked with a range of some of Britain's greatest elite teams, from GB Cycling to England Rugby to the British and Irish Lions. Saracens Rugby. So yeah, from all of that, hopefully I've got a strong basis for understanding what constitutes performance and how you achieve. And MyPeople is born out of that experience. It's software for recruiters to help them match candidates to teams, the teams they're going to place the candidate into.
I don't know about anyone else, but my mind's just gone boom. There's so many things we want to talk about. First and foremost, the sort of symbiotic nature of sport and recruitment. I think that's something that, anyone that's sort of been successful in a sport, whether that's a solo sport or whether that's a team-led sport, and I know that you're particularly focused on teams, generally speaking, people that do sport are people that want to improve, want to challenge themselves and be competitive with themselves. So, I mean, I've always been fascinated around the link between sport and recruitment. But in terms of the psychology, I'm a little bit jealous of you, actually, because I thought if I hadn't actually loved recruitment, after my first year in recruitment, maybe I'd have gone down that route as well.
It's fascinating, and hopefully I can give a fairly honest appraisal of what an elite athlete is like and some of the traits of an elite performer in that world, and it hopefully translates well into the recruitment world. But there are certainly some psychopathic personalities in the sports world. So I don't know whether that's what you meant, whether recruiters are also psychopaths. I don't know.
Possibly. No, I was trying to focus on the positive, definitely. But that's a really good starting point, actually. So explain to me, in your experience of sort of witnessing and supporting elite sporting teams, what constitutes an elite sports person from a mindset, behavioural point of view, with that, I guess, part B of that, how that then relates to recruitment.
Yeah, absolutely. So that it's probably a big answer. So I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. I was thinking earlier today about the different phases of analysing people on their journey to become elite athletes, and at different phases we're looking for different things in terms of mindset. So I focused on three things to share today. First, when you think about a young person, and I'm thinking sort of 16, 17, 18-year-olds starting their performance career in athletics, whether that's in cycling or rugby, they're not going to have a lot of skills and experience. What we're looking at there is what is the aptitude to get better. So we tend to look at the most innate qualities you can think of around getting better, which are about purpose and curiosity. How interested are they in things? How curious are they to learn more? do they have a strong focus and a direction of travel? Whether that's right or wrong, what they want to achieve is almost immaterial. It's how much are they willing to sacrifice to get to that point. So it always comes back to purpose and curiosity at an absolute fundamental level. And at the risk of bumming people out for 2 seconds, I also wanted to learn about people at the other end of the spectrum of having experiences non-elite, if you like, who were depressed and suicidal. So I was involved in a suicidal clinic for 7 years. And what I was staggered working with over sort of 100 odd people was those 2 factors are true at the other end of the spectrum. People who have lost their purpose and are not curious anymore, quite often it leads to depression. So I'd argue they are some of the most fundamental qualities to get to become elite. Next stage up, once you start to achieve, start to become better, conscientiousness. In every psychological profile, we're looking for an absolute burning desire to get better. And that can take many forms, and it can be destructive if it's not managed, where you're looking at yourself continuously thinking, how do I get better? How do I do this? You can't get better in everything at the same time. But if you've got that underlying mindset, you're likely to get better. And then the final bit to close off and hopefully answer as succinctly as possible is perhaps the least understood area, which is competition mindset versus cooperation mindset. Okay. Now, we tend to think of individual performance in competitive terms, and you'll know better than me, but I warrant most of the recruiters that you know and work with are highly competitive, and it's certainly true in athletes. Now, we would say that gets you about 90% of the way, but the final bit is about cooperation and how well you can utilize your relationships around you. And an exercise we used to do with athletes was map all of the relationships that are critical to you delivering your performance. And there'd be 20 on there. There might be, strength and conditioning coach, your manager, your friends and family might be critical. And then we'd say, grade them out of 10 as to how strong your relationships are with each of those people. And then finally, we'd say, if you've got anything less than an 8, you are not maximizing that relationship to develop your performance. And your relationship is like the oil that enables your performance. So cooperation is almost the final 5 to 10% of thinking about how am I working with those around me? How do I enable them to get better and myself to get better? And that's sort of the halo mindset.
Wow, I love all that. I was scribbling away because I don't want to forget anything that you've said, because I have got a bit of a perimenopausal brain, so I sometimes and I do, because I want to really pick up on I want to go back to all those points actually, because when people have asked me over the years, what are the traits that make a successful recruiter, if we lead it back to recruitment, for years, the word curiosity never got talked about. And if I think about some of the best recruiters that I've ever placed or worked with, and I am going to put myself in there because I became a top performer within my first recruitment job, it was the level of curiosity. I was never satisfied with what I needed to know. I couldn't find out quick enough. I couldn't find out enough, whether that was from my candidates, my clients, from my leaders. I had this voracious appetite. And I think that if you look at the best performers in any market, in any job, whether it's, singers, whether it's songwriters, whoever it might be, they are the most curious people. But I think it's combined with purpose. And I think it's understanding and a lot of young people don't. I mean, I'm a mum to 2 young people. Do they really understand what that purpose is? So they might need that sense of direction to understand that. And I think, conscientiousness. I remember my first MD saying to me, you almost feel like you need to know it all right now in your first 6 months, but it's going to take you about 2 years to understand what you really need to know. So I think but I've never forgotten that. And it's that level of accountability, I think it's empowering that person to feel accountable. And I think that's really interesting about that sort of 80% competitiveness, 20% cooperation, because without that 20%, you're just a lone wolf. And there are plenty of those rattling around recruitment companies, billing in obscene amounts of money, with leaders going, I don't know what to do with them because they're an absolute arsehole.
It's funny you say that. There's a wonderful study that I think is well worth a read up about super chickens. Have you heard of this before?
No.
It's a study by a guy called William Muir, and he was looking at measuring productivity, and he was using chickens. And so, because they lay an egg, so you got an obvious output. And he said, right, chickens don't live as long as humans, so we can measure chickens over a few lifetimes. And he said, I want to form a group called Super Chickens. So he went to a bunch of chickens. I mean, I don't know how you go to a bunch of chickens, but let's just use that phraseology. And he picked out the top performers of the chickens. So most of the chickens were laying an average amount of eggs, but 3 or 4 were really high performers. So he picked them up and he said, right, they're going to be my super chickens. They're going to breed together and they're going to lay more eggs than anything else. And over about 6 generations of chickens' lives, comes back. And what's happened? The average chicken laying egg performers have started to lay more eggs. But the other group, the super chickens, have pecked each other to death. And there's only one left because they have competed against each other, was the idea. And so his concept was, you can have an individual high performer, but they could be suppressing the performance of everybody else. They're hiding CVs. They're not communicating with anyone else. They're just about their own money situation. They're not thinking about anyone else, and they're pissing everyone else off.
Oh my God, I love that analogy, I just like to say. And I think I knew that would be the outcome. I wasn't sure they'd all be dead, apart from the one. But I think I would like to think that recruitment has moved on and has evolved and has matured, that we don't house these super chickens in inverted commas. But actually, I think the reality is very different, particularly in certain sectors that are more synonymous with the higher GP margins, such as tech and construction. And we do hear, unfortunately, testimonies of that happening. So that's really interesting that there has actually been a sort of scientific study on that, because I think I would much rather have an industry where we are all collaborating together and cooperating to create us all being great performers, because that then has a cascade effect to everybody else. I think we might have to call this episode the Super Chicken episode or something.
Well, it's interesting, yes, because you see all over LinkedIn, the £1 million biller type ideology, if you like, and it sort of relates to when we talk about hiring and the emphasis in a hiring process, what we put our emphasis on. We tend to put such an emphasis on achieving, and therefore the emphasis in an interview is often on, can they do the job? And we put almost zero emphasis on, how do they do the job? You could take 2 people and they may well get to marginally different billing numbers in a year, but it might not be that different, but they'll do the job so differently, it has an impact on everyone else differently. And it's actually quite important how someone does a job.
No, definitely. Well, that leads very nicely, doesn't it, in terms of what you do. So just explain a little bit about what MyPeople actually does, because obviously you have developed software to enable decision makers to pick out those top performers to hire into their business. So how would that work in day to day? So if I was hiring into my business, how would that work?
Yeah, in order to answer that question, I probably need just 30 seconds to explain where it comes from, because I think it was a major breakthrough in our sporting teams that we were working with at the time, especially at, say, GB Cycling, whereby the prediction of whether an athlete was likely to medal at a future Olympics was typically wrong. We never seemed to get athletes medaling. We'd pick the best of the best physically at 16, 17 years of age, these riders, and nothing happened, and we couldn't figure out why. And the big breakthrough, which latterly became known as the marginal gains approach, was, what's the environment in which they need to perform, and are we measuring the environment? Are we measuring how they're going to do the job? And that was the start of measuring not just the athlete but the environment. And so relating that to my people, and thinking about an interview process, the analogy there is about skills and experience. When we're going through a recruitment process, we put all our emphasis on the skills and experience assessment side, and nearly none on how are they going to fit into the team they're going into, because that relates to attrition, and that relates to the performance of that team, and also how are they going to do the job? Am I putting in an absolute top biller sales director who is going to piss everybody off, or am I putting in someone who'll balance out the team? That's a major piece of information that's missing, and so our system does that in 3 minutes.
Wow. I mean, it really does. I mean, that literally is our job. It's to ensure that we are not putting an absolute arsewipe into our clients or ourselves. It's true.
And it's easy to do, because an interview is like I probably should draw a distinction here. For recruiters who are recruiting every day and doing interviews, you're probably pretty good at interviewing. For a hiring manager who probably does this once, twice a year, they're probably pretty awful at it. So when you think about what we've just set up, we might have the best candidate in the world. We put them in front of a hiring manager, but the hiring manager doesn't know. They'll say things like, well, I don't know whether they're the right fit, or I don't think they're going to get on with so-and-so. but it's all guesswork, and so that interview format is not helpful. What we need is proper information to influence that.
And actually, we need to contextualize the scene that most sectors and disciplines, wherever you're listening, whether you're listening in the UK, US, I think we're probably, despite the fact that there have been, unfortunately, a lot of redundancies during 2023, we are still in a talent short and talent deficit, particularly in STEM, but also in recruitment. There's a generational gap, basically. So if you are putting yourself in the mind of that hiring manager who probably sits there thinking, oh my God, we really need that developer, we really need that person, I'm just going to overlook the fact that my gut's telling me they're not right. But actually what you're doing is saying, forget your gut. We're going to prove to you whether they're the right fit. And it's not just about fit, it's about adding value then to the team as well, isn't it?
Exactly right. So from this is sort of taking, I think, recruitment up a level. Typical assessment tools are a little bit binary. They're an extra layer to the recruitment process, and they're always done at the back end of the process, almost to justify a decision. So they're not really doing anything of value. Whereas what I'd say here is we're having a consultative relationship with our client where we're not just talking about a body, we're talking about how are they going to fit in the team? Let's discuss that. And the way we set the system up is there's no right or wrong in absolute terms. It's more about the recruiter having that information to assess, are they likely to fit? Is the candidate likely to fit into the team and what they're going to bring?
Yeah.
So that's what our product does in 3 minutes.
Yeah, and I think, you know, if we're here to enhance our industry, that's why you're listening right now. You're listening because you're a recruiter, or you're a leader, or you're an aspiring leader, and you want to do better. You want to be the best that you can be. We've got to stop going on sort of just, you know, a punt, putting somebody in. Actually, what you do see a lot is they've worked for ABC company, direct competitor to DEF, we'll just slot them straight in. And that's where, and it isn't just about attrition, by the way, or hiring, it's about retention of the right people in your business too. And I think that's going to be possibly the biggest headache for any employer or hiring manager for the foreseeable, is retaining your best people.
Definitely. I mean, as a very general statement, 2022 has probably been a brilliant year for most recruiters in most industries. The debt, if you like, that's come off the back of that year, though, is one of potential attrition, in that we're placing people into roles where the client has probably just gone, well, if they don't fit exactly, that's kind of fine. Well, yes, that doesn't matter right now because you need the skills and experience in the body sitting in your seat, but it will matter in 6 months or 9 months.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if we go back to those sort of core behaviours that we talked about earlier on with purpose, curiosity, conscientiousness, we need to be looking at people that match up to those behaviours within the context of our business, of myself, whether it's your business or my business. There's got to be an alignment there. Where does diversity and inclusion sit on this? Because, of course, I mean, we've partnered with Inclusion Crowd. They're one of our very proud partners on the podcast, which, you know, we want to educate. And the only way we can do that is bringing in specialists like them. So how does how can we as recruiters ensure that the hiring process is fair, equitable, and truly living up to that diversity and inclusion promise?
Yeah, a great question. And probably to answer that, I'm going to separate it into two. One, just to sort of talk a little bit about diversity and what we mean about that and what that means for a hiring manager, and then a little bit around how MyPeople can help with that. But I think it's a very important HR agenda. But when you hit the hiring manager, it's a very difficult conundrum. If you're doing an interview and your HR team has said, look, we need to build diversity, which is the right thing to do, not just because it's the right thing morally, but because it's also good for performance. You know, there's lots of research to suggest performance gets better when you have more diverse teams. But of course, the conundrum for a hiring manager is, how do I assess that? And there's a secondary question, which I suppose is a bit scary for hiring managers. What is it? What am I talking about when I talk about diversity? Is that diversity of experience? Is that diversity of knowledge? Is that diversity of cognitive diversity? And all of these things get thrown around on social media. But of course, it's a bit of a scary topic, especially if you're a white male like me. So what I think is clear in the academia and the research is that diversity of knowledge and experience and skills is incredibly valuable. Teams perform better when they have a diverse mix of those skills. And actually, the flip side of that equation is you're looking for people who share the same purpose. You're looking for people who an underpinning purpose is often values, who share the same sort of values to the wider group. And I think that's possibly, as best as I can think of it right now, the most equitable way to do hiring. And the way MyPeople is built is we're looking at people's values. We're not looking at where they come from. That is not part of the process. What we're talking about is how are they going to fit into a team? What are they going to bring into the team? And how's that sort of alignment of team, which is about, are we chasing after the same thing? Does it matter to me what matters to you? That becomes quite important because we're all trying to chase the same thing in a team. And if I've got 20 people with totally differing views on these things, it's just going to bubble up to the surface as conflict. So I think what we're looking for is diversity of experience, skills, thinking, and probably alignment of purpose and values.
So we go back to purpose right at the start of what we talked about earlier on. So I'm just going to throw something in here. I mean, a lot of our audience are already leaders, and you do get some very stable businesses out there. Those that have had people working with them for since the beginning of time. What's the value in them retrospectively? Incorporating your software or some kind of testing on these values to ensure that they are future-proof.
Yeah, really good question. Well, this is one of the subjects of our recent podcast with the Saracens Rugby Club, who won 5 premiership titles. They're one of the most successful rugby clubs of all time. And we were talking about values and organizational culture and how do you know it's real? Because everybody has values on the door, right? Everyone has values as you walk into an office, or at least in the old days when we had offices.
I've got mine tattooed on me. You won't be able to read it. It's in Hebrew, but it's integrity. Integrity is one of my core values, and it's literally tattooed onto my wrist, so it runs through my veins, which I know is really cheesy, but I just did it. It had a bit of a midlife crisis.
No, I love that. My Hebrew is rusty. I haven't studied Hebrew for some time. Yeah. And I think, where we fit in there within an organization is we're able to, again, do the same exercise through the software to map an organization's culture and understand how does that align to the values you have. Really, values is an active process where you're once you've established a framework of what an organization stands for, it's then looking for opportunities to show that in the way you interact with other people. And the best analogy I have is in a relationship. When you're married and you've been with someone for a long period of time, you may well have started with a similar set of values, but as you grow together, you've got to actively find ways to demonstrate those values. So if it's important for you to be kind, for example, and you stop doing nice things for your partner, you're probably not living your values. So I think the hardest bit is probably living the values rather than defining the values. And that's where organizational culture thrives.
Well, it does. And actions speak louder than words. I always say that. It's a really old-fashioned thing.
Yeah, true.
So it is true. And I do like your analogy, actually. I think that's really... that will resonate with people more than you coming out with something probably a bit more cerebral, because it's true. We can all feel that, can't we? Yeah. And whether that's in a friendship or a relationship, you have to sort of almost check yourself. But I think it's really important because often that group of people who have got a very stable team, they will drop in and listen to a podcast because they'll be interested in what's going on. It's like, well, we don't need to improve. We're okay as we are. And it's like, to use your analogy, all of a sudden you find out that your wife's having an affair because actually you haven't been kind and you haven't been looking after her and you haven't been making her feel special. So I think don't be assumptive that just because you've got a very stable team that's been with you, they've stayed loyal to you, they're all performing well, it doesn't mean that they haven't got their eye on something else. And I think what Christian's saying there is actually really vital, that you need to realign your values consistently because things change, behaviours change.
Absolutely. One of the examples from Saracens, I apologise, I'm doing a bit too much sport here, but I'll try and wrap up. Was they were talking about the evolution of their culture, that when the group first came together in, I think it was 2010, they had a very raw culture. They had a few things that they had focused on, just one or two things, and that was them. And it was very much about it's a male rugby team, so a brotherhood and living and dying for each other and putting effort in absolute to the max. But once they'd won a few titles, then they added humility into the mix and having difficult conversations. So being honest. So the values shifted a bit or got added to because of the fact they started to do well. And that created a new set of problems for them. Now we've got a group of people, just being nice to each other isn't enough. We actually have to have some tough conversations. We've got people who are going to be retiring and there's transitions, and we've got to be able to have those transitions in a way that's effective. And that meant adding to their values and being clear about what that meant.
No, definitely. I mean, no, you don't have to apologise, because I think there's a real attraction to a lot of our listeners of the sporting analogy, and I think and the background. A lot of people listening will have, and I've seen some very successful people come from sporting backgrounds, ex-professional footballers and rugby players and swimmers and tennis players, and I think that it does lend itself very well. But I just want to say, as a caveat, I was very not sporty, so that we are not being discriminatory against people who are not sporty, because I really very much wasn't sporty, but I was always in awe of people that were, because you could see that they were people that just endeavoured and were talented, and that's what we want people to fulfill their true purpose and their true goal in life. That's what this is all about. But it has been really insightful, and I'm just so pleased that you made it on, first of all, because, and I'm hoping by the time this goes out, the train strikes will have finished and the whole debacle that is causing to commuters, but who knows. We really appreciate you giving your time, because I think it's been such an interesting podcast. I don't think we've ever talked about anything like this before, so I'm sure that people will be clicking to follow your podcast, Building Great Teams, and also if they've got any interest at all in understanding how My People can benefit themselves and their clients, we'll make sure that they get in touch and they mention the podcast to you. So it's been really great. Thank you for joining us on the Recruitment podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been lovely talking to you.
Been lovely talking to you too.